Cessation of suffering. Long format. Before we can solve problems, however large or trivial these problems may be, we must first understand them accurately. If not, they may become more complex and severe. To effectively resolve life's dilemmas, we must understand each dilemma as well as the conditions giving rise to it. This is especially true when dealing with life's fundamental problem. We must know suffering and the causes that bring about suffering. We must have an understanding of the truth, which is the essential factor for bringing an end to all suffering. A misunderstanding of the truth, on the other hand, creates problems. It results in people's attempted solutions having an effect counter to the desired effect and further intensifying suffering. The origination cycle, i.e. the creation of suffering, begins with ignorance avijja, to volitional activities, sankhara, to consciousness, vijnana, to mentality and corporeality, namarupa, to six sense basis, salayatana, to contact, phassa, to feeling, vedana, to craving, tanha, to clinging, upadana, to becoming, bhava, to birth, jati, to aging and death, jara, marana, sorrow, sukha, lamentation, parideva, pain, dukkha, grief, domanassa, and despair, upayasa, equals origin of suffering, dukkha samudaya. The reverse form of this is the cessation cycle, which begins with the extinguishing or absence of ignorance. Ignorance ceases, to volitional activities cease, to consciousness ceases, to mentality and corporeality ceases, to six sense basis cease, to contact ceases, to feeling ceases, to craving ceases, to clinging ceases, to becoming ceases, to birth ceases, to aging, death, and sorrow, despair cease, equals cessation of suffering, dukkha nirodha. The word nirodha, cessation, does not merely mean that something comes to an end, but also that it cannot reappear or function in the future. It is prevented from arising, it is stilled or detoxified. The term paticca samuppada nirodhavara means the ending of existent suffering and the prevention of further suffering, a process in which suffering does not arise. The expression ignorance ceases means both the end of existing ignorance and the non-arising of future ignorance. It refers to knowledge, vijja, to freedom from ignorance. Short format. Both the origination cycle and cessation cycle shown above are expressed in the long format with all 12 constituent factors. Each cycle proceeds in consecutive order until all factors are complete. However, these cycles are not always shown in this way, with the entire sequence of 12 factors. In the Pali Canon, there are passages where, for the practical application of the teachings of the Buddha presented, a process observable in daily life. The structure of these shortened formats depends on the point at which a problem begins and on the aspect he wished to emphasize. The short format of the origination cycle begins with cognition at the sixth sense basis, ayatana, and then proceeds as an unbroken chain to aging, death, sorrow, and despair. The initial part of the process, from ignorance up to the sixth sense basis, is omitted as its inherent influence is understood. The short format of the cessation cycle begins at the cessation of craving, after initial contact and feeling. Here are two examples from the Pali Canon of the origination cycle in short format. Monks, the child grows up and his faculties mature still further. The youth enjoys himself, provided and endowed with the 5 strands of sensual pleasure, with forms, sounds, odours, flavours, and tangibles that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and endearing, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On seeing a form with the eye, hearing a sound with the ear, smelling an odour with the nose, tasting a flavour with the tongue, touching a tangible with the body, cognizing a mind object with the mind, he is fond of it if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is displeasing. He abides with mindfulness of the body, unestablished with an inferior, undeveloped mind, and he does not understand as it actually is deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom, wherein evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Engaged as he is in favouring and opposing whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he is gratified by that feeling. He broods over and welcomes it and submits to it. As he does so, delight, nandi, infatuation arises in him. Now delight in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, becoming arises. With becoming as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. Bhikkhus, what is the origin of suffering? Dependent on the eye and form, eye consciousness arises. The union of these 3 is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. This is the origin of suffering. The same for the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Selecting the principal elements in the above texts, the origination cycle can be shown as follows. 1. 6 sense basis: to contact, to feeling, to delight, nandi, to clinging, to becoming, to birth, to aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair equals the arising of suffering. 2. 6 sense basis: to contact, to feeling, to craving, tanha, equals the arising of suffering. These 2 examples are essentially the same. They both begin with cognition at the sense basis. The first example presents the process up to the end. The second example presents the process only up to craving. The remainder is to be inferred. Now, 2 examples of the cessation cycle, short format. 1. The aforementioned child has studied and practiced the Dhamma, consisting of moral conduct and sense restraint, and developed concentrated absorption, jhana. On seeing a form with the eye, cognizing a mind object with the mind, he is not fond of it if it is pleasing. He is not annoyed with it if it is displeasing. He abides with mindfulness of the body, established with a developed, immeasurable mind, and he understands that it actually is deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Having thus abandoned favouring and opposing whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he is not gratified by that feeling. He does not welcome it or submit to it. As he does not do so, delight in infatuation in feelings ceases in him. With the cessation of his delight comes cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of becoming. With the cessation of becoming, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. To bhikkhus, what is the passing away of suffering? Dependent on the I and form, I consciousness arises. The union of these three is contact. With contact as condition there is feeling, with feeling as condition there is craving. Because that craving ceases and is extinguished without remainder, clinging ceases. With the cessation of clinging, becoming ceases. With the cessation of becoming, birth ceases. With the cessation of birth, old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. In this way the entire mass of suffering ceases. This is the passing away of suffering. Same for the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Based on these two texts, the cessation cycle can be depicted as follows. 1. 6 sense basis: to contact, to feeling, to delight, nandi ceases, to clinging ceases, to becoming ceases, to birth ceases, to aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and affliction cease, equals the cessation of suffering. 2. 6 sense basis: to contact, to feeling, to craving, tanha, but craving ceases, to clinging ceases, to becoming ceases, to birth ceases, to aging and death, sorrow, affliction cease, equals the cessation of suffering. The first example presents all components of the short format, but in reversed form to the origination cycle. The second example begins the same way as example 2 of the origination cycle above, but where the origination cycle ends at craving, here the process changes course and completes the cycle of cessation. These two examples are essentially the same. They both demonstrate a severance of the cycle following initial cognition and feeling. As a result, delight or craving is prevented from arising and suffering ceases. Note that the meaning of nandi in the first passage is similar to that of tanaha in the second. The meaning differs only slightly, suited to the context of the first passage. Note also that the expression delight ceases in example 1 indicates clearly that delight does not arise. There is no delight infatuation. One can apply this to passage 2. Unlike the origination cycle, where craving arises subsequent to initial cognition and feeling, craving is now uprooted. The cycle is broken and the subsequent factors do not arise. The cessation of suffering is accomplished. Although the short formats of Samsara Vata and Vivata do not mention ignorance, the notion of ignorance is integral to both the origination and cessation cycles. When a feeling is experienced in the origination cycle, craving arises as a result of not fully comprehending the truth about the object encountered, that it is impermanent, anicca, subject to pressure, dukkha, and non-self, anatta, and that it cannot be truly held on to as one's own. Also, a person does not know how the object is beneficial or harmful. he cognizes with ignorance, avijja sampasa. The feeling ensuing from such contact gives rise to craving. In contrast, when a feeling is experienced in the cycle of cessation, craving does not arise, because the conditioned nature of the object is fully understood. With knowledge vijja as a basis, cognition occurs in a way not influenced by ignorance. Contact and feeling then do not lead to craving. The expression craving ceases implies the cessation of ignorance. Here the short format indirectly points to the cessation of ignorance by highlighting the cessation of craving. This is analogous to the Buddha's concise definition of the second and third noble truths. Craving is the cause of suffering, and the end of suffering occurs with the end of craving. The Buddha used this way of speaking for practical reasons to illustrate the path and its immediate benefits. The key feature of cessation in both the long and short formats is the breaking of the sequence. Generally, the sequence is broken at one or two junctures. The primary break is at ignorance, and the secondary break is at craving. Breaking the cycle is of two types, directly at ignorance and indirectly at craving. In either case, the break that is made must include the elimination of ignorance. Once the cycle is broken, the round of rebirth, samsara vata, ends. The process of turning away vivata is reached, and freedom from suffering is attained. A person thus vanquishes all of life's troubles and is without sorrow and affliction. He or she has true happiness, arriving at knowledge, vijja, liberation, vimutti, purity, visuddhi, peace, santi, and Nibbana. This is the highest benefit that human beings can obtain, making life worthwhile.